Like spotting the first sign of shore after years adrift, Skull and Bones has finally actually found its way to launch. 6 separate delays might make you understandably apprehensive about Ubisoft's long-brewing pirate game, but after spending over 60 hours hoisting sails and swabbing decks, I've had a yo-ho whole lot of co-op fun. The 17th century Indian Ocean works well as a vast open world to be explored and plundered. The RPG mechanics are briny deep with opportunities for buildcrafting, and the naval combat is consistently entertaining. Predictably, there are still some major concerns common with always online games nowadays, including performance issues and bugs aplenty, as well as a very small list of endgame activities that become monotonous and grindy. Skull and Bones might not be the quadruple A man-o'-war Ubisoft was hoping for just yet, but for having a year of upcoming content mapped out, it's already quite seaworthy. Skull and Bones is fairly unique in the scheme of open-world RPGs, letting you sail the ocean in search of loot and infamy. Alone or alongside the ships of up to 2 friends as a fleet, you'll gather resources and complete action-packed heists to feed your greed and power up your vessel, which is usually a blast. Though it might be tempting to compare this online ocean to Sea of Thieves, Skull and Bones actually has more in common with the Forza Horizon series. They're both over-the-top arcadey open-world RPGs where you play as a vehicle, except instead of racing cars with friends, you're committing piracy in boats. And that laser focus on intricate maritime gameplay and commodity simulation is extremely enjoyable most of the time. Even if you never get to swing a sword or fire a flintlock like in Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag. While it's a bit odd at first that you only ever explore the world by controlling your ship, aside from brief intermissions at the social hub, it took just a few hours for me to feel like I wasn't missing out on much. 'Cause I mean, boats are fun. Disappointingly, Skull and Bones only has the faintest whiff of a story. You have some conversations with a couple pirate legends.
He taunts me like I'm a caged animal and I've got the urge to bite.
Run a few missions for them that conclude in a boss fight against a particularly mean boat. Then they tell you to buzz off and do your own thing just as fast. NPCs are little more than vendors and quest dispensers with no substantial story connecting them.
Use force or underhanded means to secure more manufactories and put them to your use.
I expect my pirate games to have a bit of drama, infighting, and betrayal, but Skull and Bones doesn't even attempt to tell a tale of any substance or consequence. Instead, ship-to-ship PvE combat is the star of the show, and it requires strategy, cooperation with other player-controlled vessels, and good aim to pull off at higher levels. For example, when taking on powerful fleets found in later areas, you might want to reconfigure your ship to a tank build optimized for withstanding hits and dealing close-range damage, while your friends focus on DPS or even support options capable of healing allies by peppering them with nonsensically medicinal cannonballs. Crafting new ships and trying out different builds is extremely compelling. Just when I thought I'd built my ideal vessel, I'd see a special cannon or a unique piece of ship armor I just couldn't live without, then gleefully jump through surprisingly rewarding hoops by attacking certain factions and seeking out rare resources to buy a schematic and craft it. For example, I spent many hours and tons of resources to craft my first mortar, which unlocked the ability to rain fire from the sky on my enemies like I was calling in an airstrike. Sure, doing so forced me to spend every last scrap of my ill-gotten riches, but can you really put a price on this? As you dive into the endgame, the builds that open up get downright wild, and you can unlock a ship-mounted flamethrower that spews ghostly blue flames, or rocket launchers that do this. Crazy stuff. Once you've established yourself on the high seas a bit, you'll also begin to understand both trade routes and the supply and demand they influence in different parts of the world, which adds an interesting economy management mini-game to the mix. You'll even gain access to the black market via the Helm, a clever endgame mechanic that allows you to build and manage underworld businesses by creating and delivering embargoed goods, like good ol' opium. This opens up a whole new way to line your pockets, as you ferry legitimate and illegitimate goods to and fro, buying low in one place and selling high in another, like a pirate with a bachelor's degree in business. Yar, we be looking for that ROI. Later on, you can even conquer coastal settlements to convert them into manufactories that generate passive income and help you obtain the most powerful equipment. Before I knew it, I suddenly found myself playing Pirate SimCity, or as I like to call it, SimCT, as I managed lumberyards and farming settlements, which is a great playground for the endgame grind. That's because, in order to add settlements to your collection, you'll need to participate in Skull and Bones' endgame events, which include PvP activities which don't appear until later on, adding a neat new wrinkle to things right as they start to feel stale with the overwhelmingly PvE foundation. These isolated PvP events are a nice compromise from having griefers constantly attack everyone all the time, since you've got to opt into each of them, but the reward is usually worth the trouble. When they work properly, that is, and unfortunately, they often don't. Bugs are obnoxiously common, like one where incorrect markers get put all over the map. During one PvP event, Skull and Bones crashed entirely, and the loot I was carrying was nowhere to be found when I logged back in. Issues like these are pretty rampant once you reach the endgame, and they'll continue to throw a massive wet sail over the whole thing until they get addressed. Even when these events are working, the endgame is needlessly grindy in its current state. Skull and Bones doesn't have nearly enough variety in its activities to keep things interesting for very long. Since it costs thousands of gold coins to unlock single items, you're expected to play a whole heck of a lot long after the campaign has sunk to the bottom of the sea. There aren't currently any quests or enemies in the world that require those powerful items to defeat either, aside from other players in specific events. Hopefully, the upcoming seasonal content will provide actual reasons to want them, but Ubisoft would also need to add a lot more activities to keep that grind interesting, because right now, all you can do is repeat the same handful of tasks, then shuttle your loot from each settlement back to the base ad nauseum.
It is not always about whose ship has the biggest cannons in her belly.
Although it's not particularly unique in the live service space, Skull and Bones is extremely unstable right now too. I had crashes every couple of hours, pixelated textures that loaded right in front of me, and most irritating of all, constant erroneous notifications popping up every couple of seconds, sometimes repeatedly for hours at a time, clogging up the screen with obnoxious and inaccurate warnings that drove me absolutely up the wall. I still enjoyed most of my time lobbing explosives at unsuspecting merchant vessels, but shiver me timbers, that exasperating layer of jank really made it harder to love. Skull and Bones isn't the successor to Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag that many seem to want, and it isn't many of the things Ubisoft itself said it would be at various points in its storied development, but the seafaring RPG we ultimately got is still surprisingly good. Sailing around the Indian Ocean firing cannons, mortars, and giant ballista at your foes is a fun time. The RPG mechanics and cooperative buildcrafting is as deep as the ocean, with plenty of awesome gadgets to grind for. And the economy simulation is impressively in-depth. It doesn't quite fulfill the promise of a decade-long cruise to port yet either, with a thin endgame, almost no story to speak of, and general instability that sometimes makes the adventure feel like a rough draft. But here's hoping some of those shortcomings can be washed away by the waves of content already planned to come in an ambitious live service roadmap that's fast approaching. For now, its maiden voyage is a good start. For more, check out our reviews of Mario vs. Donkey Kong and Helldivers 2. And for everything else, stick with IGN.